Hey folks, it's Nate. Thanks for joining me at the art table again today. I am back looking again at 20th Century Boys. We are getting down towards the end of the series, halfway through Volume 8. We're going to finish out Volume 8 now and try and get through the rest of the series by the end of October. We'll see how that works out as other things present themselves, but for the most part, I want to get done with the series by then, so I have a couple of weeks do recaps of the characters as they're presented in this story. And then I want to look at 21st Century Boys, which is an alternate ending to the series that changes character elements to a certain extent. Now, when we last left off, we had just seen the attempted assassination of the Pope foiled by the unexpected return to life of our friend. And he has now essentially ceased to be a political figure or a cult figure, and he's truly become a figure of religious devotion. But before we can talk too much about what the consequences of that are, we get a couple of interesting things. First is a hint that Kenji is coming back. And this was pretty exciting to me the first time I saw this. My biggest problem with it is that it takes so long to pay off. It is good to see Kenji again. Remember, he's been missing pretty much since the beginning of the second act, although we've seen him a little bit in flashbacks to keep our memories of him fresh. But by and large, Kenji's return here is, or at least the hinting of his return here, is oddly placed because we're not actually going to see much of it for quite some time. After this, we actually get an interesting interlude, for lack of a better term. We get this opening color page on a sort of a flashback. We see the characters going back in time. We see them looking at a rainbow. This was also a symbol for the coming plague that the FDP had unleashed on the world. But right now, we are just going back to the 1970s, and we're getting some story back here in the childhood era. And this is probably the longest single stretch of childhood era events in the entire story. They take place from the summer of 69 to the summer of 71. And they kind of retread some events we're already familiar with. But instead of seeing them from the position of Kenji and his friends, we get them from the position of our friend and his friends, for lack of a better way to put it. And because I really don't want to talk too much about Friend's identity outside of a couple of places, both here and later on when I do the recap section on him, I really want to gloss over this a little bit. For the most part, the main characters here are Friend himself, the young version of Sadakio, and the young version of Dr. Yamane. And we see a lot of the same dynamics between these characters as we saw when they were adults. Their relationship really doesn't seem to have changed over the years. It's just really cemented itself as more and more what it always was. Nothing wrong with that. This sequence really serves more to show us Friend as he develops his ideas, his rivalry with Kenji, and we get a sense of what really drove him. He always wanted to be the center of attention. And he would tell stories, he would make them up, and he would share them with Yamane and Sadakio in an attempt to circulate them around and get people to pay attention to him. Unfortunately, this never really quite worked as he intended, because Kenji is always overshadowing him. Kenji always seems to have something more and more fun going on. This culminates in the incident with the house on Hanging Hill, which is come up several times where Sadakio and our friend hung a Tera Tera Bozu, which is a kind of good luck doll for good weather, from a stairway in the house on Hanging Hill and tried to convince people the house was haunted. And this was something they kind of did for fun, but it was a particularly important moment in Friend's summer because during the summer of 1970, he told everyone he was going to the World Expo, but he didn't actually go. I don't think we ever find out exactly why he didn't actually go. I don't know if he never actually planned to go or if he just had a change of plans. But he was supposed to come back with a lot of news about the World Expo, and everyone was supposed to be very interested in what he had to say about it. Instead, when he got back from the World Expo, he found that everyone was taken up with Kenji's story about the house on Hanging Hill. And this was, I think, the final rift between our friend and Kenji, when Friend decided that he was going to take Kenji's stories that he had told in the Book of Prophecy and steal them for himself. And everything after that is just sort of a consolidation of these ideas until he is ready to go off on his deranged world conquest plan. And we really don't get much beyond that. A couple of important things happen here. We're reminded of the time Donkey went to the classroom to plug in the fish tank, and the ghost story that is told about the classroom there. And a couple of other important threads are brought back up. We see Manjome reappear as a young man, as a salesman. And these are threads that are reintroduced to us that run through the entire story up to this point. More, I think, to kind of tie these all up and show us their origin story before we go into the last act and tie them off at the other end. Show us how all of this finally plays out. There's nothing wrong with this sequence. I find its placement a bit mysterious for reasons that I will get onto when I finally summarize Friend as a character. But at the end of it, we see a hallucination of Kenji right here that our friend is having, or at least the person who is wearing the Friend mask. Because at this point, we feel more and more certainly that this is not the guy we think it is. There are some hints here and there. There's his sudden appearance in front of Manjome during the second VR sequence. There are a few other things. And then we finally come back to the present, and we realize that our friend was kind of hooked up to this EKG readout system. And yeah, so he seems to be either having his memories read or downloading memories. We have a moment here where he says those were supposed to be memories from the past. And that is another sign that we might not be dealing with our friend himself. He may have been accessing our friend's memories to help this sham that he's putting on of the friend still being alive. But all of this isn't clear yet. Now we find ourselves, as he steps out from this medical procedure, we find ourselves in year 3 of the friendship era. The FDP is now part of a world government. They have taken over Japan, and things look very run down and dystopian. Apparently, the last 3 years have not been very kind to Tokyo. And from here, we get an interesting setup. Once again, we are introduced to new viewpoint characters to ease us into this new world. In this case, it's a brother and sister and their family. And the brother is a wrestling enthusiast. The sister is kind of a brainy girl. She's very studious. But the brother is probably the most important character, at least to start us off, because he's the one who's found Acho. Acho thinks that, or the kid thinks that Acho is a wrestler, a famous sumo wrestler, but Acho disabuses him of this notion. He says, there was a time people called me Shogun, but really I'm just plain old Acho. This is an important moment in the story as well. It sets up an important theme that ties back into Kana's moment at the end of the last VR sequence, when Donkey told her he just wanted to be a plain old science teacher. Our characters have gone on quite the journey. They started out as normal kids with huge ambitions. They grew up to be disillusioned adults who tried to reclaim some of that ambition and that fire to fight against a force of evil in the world. And now they are old, and they are starting to realize that they are not particularly special people. And they have to accept that their ability in the world is going to be very limited, especially now that they are older. Acho in particular has been the physical powerhouse of the group. He's older now and he doesn't have that same kind of ability that he had when he was in his 20s and 30s. So um, it's interesting that this is going to be the through line for the end of the story. Because while they were realistic people, Kenji and his friends were always presented to us as very special. They had this special connection, this special bond, and now they have been scattered to the winds, not once, but twice. And things are not going in their favor. And it turns out, as we're going to see as we go forward, it is not the extraordinary nature of their bonds or their goals and ambitions that will carry them through, but rather their ordinary acts of compassion, kindness, and their ordinary bonds with each other that is going to make the biggest difference. Now, as we go forward, we follow the sister of our family for a bit, and I'm afraid I have forgotten the names here. These characters are around for a bit, but they are not. They're not the most impactful in the story, and this is one of my issues with this act. Although it could really be raised about any third act in a story, that is that a number of characters are introduced here that are just not going to have a big impact on the story. They're here to just kind of get us through important sections of the story so that we can eventually arrive at the conclusion. And there's nothing wrong with that. The girl is, she kind of has a crush on an older boy at school who has gone to a bunch of protests. People are protesting the FDP and their heavy-handed utopian policies in the wake of the plague, and they're pretty much not getting anywhere. And they are they're unsure what to do at this point. Acho is living in their shed. The boy and eventually the girl take an interest in his well-being, but Acho has broken his leg when he snuck into Tokyo. There's a big wall around Tokyo now, and Acho pole vaulted over it, but he landed bad, so his foot isn't in the greatest condition. And as he's recovering, he begins to put together some facts. You learn that Yoshitsune's group is still active here. They are still trying to rescue political dissidents before they get disappeared. And Kana's group is planning something of their own, but nobody's quite sure what. All of this kind of comes to a head because the kids stay up late watching TV. And I know that sounds weird, but taking a page from 1984, the televisions are also surveillance devices, and you're not supposed to watch them after a certain point at night. But the kids do, and the result is that the TV stops working. If you use your TV after a certain point at night, it's basically sabotage, so it fails. And then the kids try to take it in to get replaced, but it turns out that that's how they know who to arrest. When your TV fails, you bring it into them, and then they arrest you, basically. So Acho goes with them. He's trying to sneak out. They have their TV on a cart, and he hides under the tarp of the cart along with the TV. But when he realizes that the kids are going to be arrested, he sabotages the TV so it explodes. I'm not sure you can make just a television explode that way, but okay, that's what happens. And they escape. And they find themselves at the bowling alley. This is the same bowling alley that replaced their secret base back in the day. And they go in, and they find Kami-sama. And he's sitting there. He's basically just waiting for the end. Kami-sama has been around a long time. He's seen the bowling boom come and go. He's been homeless. He's been wealthy. And now, at the end of all things, he's sitting there wondering why he doesn't see the future anymore. And he realizes that our friend is done playing games, and now it's time to clean up all the toys. Toys in this case being the people. And that is pretty much the end of Volume 8. And it's not a great place to end the story. I mean, the statement that Our friend plans to clean up the planet, basically, put away all his toys, is kind of sinister. It emphasizes this very childish game playing nature that our friend has had pretty much the entire story. But when you contrast that with the fact that the person wearing friend's mask doesn't seem to be the same man who set everything up, you begin to wonder if this is just a way for somebody in over their head to cover for their failings. A lot of the genius and creativity and force of personality that made our friend so deadly is not quite as present with this new incarnation. And there's a couple of holes there, to be perfectly honest, because we have seen this person who is wearing the mask several times already in the story, and there has been at least some of that factor to him in those meetings. Now, he could be faking it, but the fact that he doesn't seem to be as in control of his environs, the fact that he had to reach up and grab a child's hand rather than use his telekinetic or ESP powers to distract the child, all of these point to possibly him playing out a script and trying to fill in the shoes of our friend. But I'm not sure that this twist is something that Urosawa had in mind as he was setting it up, which results in, I mean, our hints are vague enough that they don't directly contradict each other until we get the final explanation. But the feel is off, and that is an important part of storytelling, that feel, that sense of progression of what's going on and what could happen. It's not always pitch perfect in this particular part of the story, which is unfortunate but understandable. You don't always get everything right, and when you have a serialized art form like manga, where the story has to grind forward every couple of weeks or every month, that can definitely happen. So the feel of it isn't great. And honestly, we're doing some setup here at Urosawa's usual very relaxed pace. Almost all acts in an Urosawa story begin with this kind of relaxed pacing to it. The better to ratchet up tension as things move forward. But after the end of the second act, this really feels very anticlimactic, especially with the long 4 to 6 chapter flashback in the middle of, in between the end of the second act and the beginning of the third act. Or really, I guess you could call that the beginning of the third act. Regardless, the pacing here doesn't seem very good. And I have praised the pacing in 20th Century Boys in a lot of places. A lot of places it has great pacing. I just don't think this is one of them. I'm not sure what the best approach to this would have been, other than to maybe... Now, I want to say you could almost show these flashbacks instead of from Friend's point of view, from Sadakiyo's or Yamane's point of view, as they have some of their bigger character revelations earlier in the story. And then you could probably pick up the last little bits of it later on in the story. But, again, I'm not entirely convinced Urosawa had all of this worked out earlier in the story because he had to go along with the story as it was being told. There are strengths to that and there are weaknesses to that. And this is one of those weaknesses. It's not great. It's not perfect. But it doesn't detract too much from what comes after this. And it doesn't detract at all from what came before. So it's not the biggest flaw in the story. On the other hand, I wouldn't blame people who skipped a lot of this until later on and then came back to it. All in all, I think this is probably the lowest, least impactful part of the story. And as you can probably gather by the fact I haven't said as much about it as I have in other videos, I don't think there's a whole lot to unpack here beyond the minor failings that it has. So That's really all the thoughts that I have for you here. And yeah, hold on, hold on. Kenji is out there. He is coming. You've seen him a few times. He's back. Don't quite know what he's up to yet. Maybe next time. Anyway, let me know what you think down in the comments below. There's a like button and a subscribe button down there. You can use those as you see fit, and I will talk to you later.